no matter how bad it gets, no matter how alone you can feel, how isolated, you just got to keep pushing, because at the other side, you're going to find the people you need. One way or another, you are going to find those people, and you are already loved. While there is lots of discrimination towards our communities, there's just as much compassion. And compassion will always be more powerful than destruction.
Welcome to Stronger Than You Think, a podcast by Youth Villages. I'm your host, Alec Ogg. In each episode, you'll hear a story of resilience from a former foster youth. They've overcome unimaginably difficult circumstances, and they'll share a mental health practice that helped them to persevere. You'll also be hearing from mental health professionals who work at Youth Villages. They'll add some clinical perspective on how you can incorporate these mental health tools in your own life so that you can be stronger than you think. Our guest today is Elliot.
How do I sound?
It sounds great, and yeah, that looks good.
Okay.
Elliot is 19 and lives in North Carolina. He'll be discussing what it's like growing up with gender dysphoria and how healing is a process that takes time. He also introduces us to cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, a tool that he says was integral to his healing. Here to help us better understand cognitive behavioral therapy in general is Dr. Lindsay Pate.
I'm Lindsay Pate. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and work within the clinical services department at Youth Villages as a program manager.
In addition to program management, Dr. Pate also oversees clinical content development,
so that the folks who are working in the front lines with our youth and families are getting the most up-to-date research and science on the tools that they use in the field to make sure that they're providing the best services.
We'll hear more of Dr. Pate's evidence-based tools later in this episode. But before we get into Elliot's story, I want to give a quick content warning that this episode contains references that may be triggering and difficult to hear. This includes references to sexual assault, abuse, self-harm, and suicidal ideation. This trigger warning is to empower you as the listener to make a healthy decision about if, when, and how you should consume this episode. If you need support, please look at the links for resources we've listed in the show notes. Now, here's Elliot's story.
Okay, so my name is Elliot, and I am a trans man in foster care, extended foster care. And first thing that I noticed growing up was that I had a very strange relationship with myself and my being. I didn't really identify with femininity. I didn't enjoy it. I remember when I was very young, there were times where I really thought I was a boy. I was pretty sure about it. Back in elementary school, we were on a field trip, and I didn't really have any friends, so I sat by myself, but there were a group of boys in the back, and this might be a little vulgar, but they were talking about the fact that they had penises. And, I overheard it, and I was like, I have one too. I'm just like you all. And they were like, no, you're not. You're a girl. But I was very convinced. I was like, I'm a boy too. And they kind of just shut me off. They're like, no, just stop. And to that, it could seem like, for a parent, maybe just a kid not grasping reality yet, not being self-aware. But in that time, that was really what it was I was pretty convinced when I was very young. And so I would often hang around with guys, and I thought, I was one of them. But being so young, being a girl into video games at that time, like 2000s, it was kind of like, oh, you're kind of weird, So I never really had any friends. Already being kind of a loner, I was prone to, being pushed around and stuff. I'd fall victim to jokes that would be like, oh, so-and-so likes you. And I would be like, what, really? Like, nah. And, it hurt, because ultimately I was too different. And even in high school, people would giggle, kind of look aside. It was just that constant feeling of always being uncomfortable in public or in my own body. It translated into my relationships in school, and Nothing felt right. Growing up, I didn't really have a father figure, but I had a stepdad that came into the picture, and I continued to see that as the part of my life when I was around like 9 or 10 years old that things started to go downward in a spiral. It was kind of jarring how, with this new person here who did not really have good intentions, little me, it was like my whole world changed. And I'm trying to balance, like, I didn't even know what gender dysphoria was, the condition that makes me transgender, but I was balancing that too. And it just kind of throughout my childhood, even when everything was going on, it it just kind of dwindled there and made everything harder. Whenever it was starting to get really bad, sophomore year of high school, I couldn't focus in class because my stepdad would argue, and it was pretty much every day when I came home, someone was being threatened, something horrendous was happening. It was all just like, I felt very blocked. I felt like I was in a box. I couldn't get out. But during that time, I wasn't sure how I was going to make it. I didn't see myself making it. I didn't have a purpose yet. I was just in a limbo. There's one quote that stuck with me for a good majority of my life, from Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. And it goes something like, they were trying to save their souls, and who but a fool could fail to see that all that was the matter with their souls was that they had not been able to get a decent existence for their bodies. That, for me, it just reflects to me, like, growing up, I was already in an abusive home, but also there was just something wrong with me that I couldn't put the words on it because I didn't know what dysphoria was. I didn't know that the condition made me existing in my body far less than decent. It was depression. It was not being able to take a shower. It wasn't me. When I realized something was off, particularly, was whenever I've had my first ever real crush, my first high school crush. And she was a girl, and any kind of relationship like that was really frowned upon. It was like stepping back in a time machine, morally speaking. I fell head over heels for this girl in my art class, and first crushes are always really intense, so I was just very lovey-dovey. And so one day when I was texting her, my parents found my phone and found the texts, and their reaction, it was, I can still remember everything like it was yesterday. It was, in the moment, it was terrifying, seeing stuff being thrown and being called slurs. For any child that was genuinely having those feelings, it would be traumatizing. And it was. And so from then on forward, I was just in such confusion, even more so with myself, because I couldn't really hide it anymore. There was something wrong with me. And that was what I thought, because I was so out of touch with myself, but at the same time, things felt like they were supposed to be coming together at this point, that I was accepting the fact that I was masculine and I wasn't, necessarily supposed to be feminine. So for a while, I thought I was like a butch lesbian, because I had brought up the fact, just a few times alluded to my parents, that maybe I wasn't a girl. And every time it would be an experience that still haunts me. And so with that, there was a good portion of my childhood that I really, really tried to be what they wanted me to be. I was never happy.
This pattern continued until one day when a teacher noticed something may not be right at home.
My favorite teacher, my creative writing teacher, I spent a lot of my day with him because Every once in a while, I would come into his classroom and I would just be like, "Oh my God, I know this was a mistake," and he would be like, "It's fine. Your mom's gonna be understanding." Well, the third time I come into his classroom, he's like, "All right, maybe we should talk to the guidance counselors about this." So I'm going down to the office, and my parents call, and I answer my phone, and they're just screaming. Luckily, we were right in front of the guidance counselor's office, so they were like, "Oh my God, you come in." And the guidance counselors started asking a few questions, and they immediately were like, "All right, we're getting authorities involved." And, there were just so many things happening. She was like calling my phone over and over and over, and they were like, "Don't answer it." And I went immediately into fight, flight, or freeze. I was just sobbing. And after a while, it was like 5 o'clock. I had to go home. So one of the workers drove me home, and she wanted to come in with me. And as soon as I walked in, they were screaming. And as soon as I told them that someone was there, and so I peeped out the door and I was like, "You can't come in. I'm sorry." So something about that, they took they took all the evidence they had, took it to the court. The court approved them to, I'm not sure what it was called, but they could take me out of the home.
For 3 hours, Elliot waited, unsure of what was going to happen next.
That whole time, my parents would get calls from DSS, the Department of Social Services for my area. And I was just so distraught because I didn't know what to do. My parents had already stripped my room, so they just moved my mattress downstairs for me to sleep in the kitchen so they could watch me. I wish I was joking. And they took everything I had to communicate with, any like phones, even little electronics like MP3s, whatever, and just took them all downstairs. They were all piled on the bed like some sort of weird trophy, like in their room, where we talked. The one thing about my stepdad, he loved seeing me get in trouble, and he was never a mature, not at all a father figure. And so in this moment, anytime something like this happened, it was because he was jealous of my relationship with my parents, my biological parents. So it was really terrifying. I was being screamed at. And so every once in a while, I would just get to a breaking point when my parents would be like, all right, let's calm down. It's going to be fine. And then another call would come from DSS, and then it would just start up again. Well, that kept going until around 10 p.m. And my parents got one last call from DSS saying, "We're going over there for an investigation." And so my parents made me clean the house really quick. And so we were all sitting in the kitchen, and my parents were like, "Oh, it's fine. It'll be fine. Don't cry. You're not allowed to be upset." This wasn't the first time I had actually had to deal with DSS. I did this earlier in my life when my stepdad threatened to kill me when he was drunk. And I ran down the street until I could find a home that would open up, and I was like, "My dad's gonna kill me." And it was terrifying. But we were sitting in the kitchen when they knocked on the door, and we thought it was people interviewing, but there were police there. And they stated, the court approved our orders, and we're taking your child. And the last time I've ever seen my parents was them glaring at me as I walked through the door.
Elliot was then admitted to a crisis center, where he had time to reflect on his family and what had just happened.
It was like I wasn't trapped anymore. I knew that. But I also still felt like, because I upset my parents, because they're unbelievably angry at me, I thought I had to go home and mend it. And I had to be there. And so the police and social worker were ushering me out, and they were like, "You're not in trouble, nothing's wrong, we're gonna help you." And they I did the most, like, I don't know, in the moment it was just so telling because, and I just laugh at this stuff. I laugh a lot. In the moment it was so telling because my social worker, it wasn't my social worker, it was like an investigating social worker. But she was like, So what's your relationship like with your parents? And I was like, I love my parents. They never did anything wrong. I just need to go back home. And it took me throughout my stay at the hospital for 3 days, I was interviewed by about 4 psychologists. And every time I told them that I needed to go home. But I'm really glad that they, even to this day, I'm so thankful that they were considerate enough. Even one of them specifically said, like, wow, you're really strong, and I think you've got a lot looking forward ahead of you, but I don't think you need to go back home. And at that moment, I didn't know what to do. But my stay at the hospital helped, at the Child Crisis Center, helped me slowly begin the process of coming to terms with everything, beginning to trust the process, yet I didn't trust it quite yet. I trusted it enough to be able to go to court and get out, but that whole segment of my life, I would never go back, ever, but I'm still really proud of myself. So it took a long time in the hospital for me to be able to finally stop letting that way that I had, that mindset, take over me, that I'd learned for so long from being abused. I stayed in the hospital for about a little over a month. I was first in the emergency room, and then I got moved to a general psych ward. There were so many aspects of myself that I couldn't realize, like, something was wrong with me. I couldn't make friends. I had this uncomfortableness with my body. And I was just in an immense amount of stress. I couldn't sleep. For about 3 days I was there. And that was where I had my subconscious, with everything going on, was like, haha, we're going to remind you that you were raped as a child. And it was like, oh, I didn't process it as first. I knew the moment I had that flashback, I remembered having the same memory when I was younger. So I knew it wasn't just me. Like, I remembered having a flashback of the same flashback that I had as a child, and I didn't understand the context of it. But now that I was older, it made sense. I was suicidal in that moment because I was so hopeless. This was a point in my life where everything was falling apart. I had no idea what to latch onto. I had no idea who to trust, who to go to for support. I didn't have parents anymore to run to like I was when I was little, when I was scared. But something about going to the hospital and finally going to the crisis center kind of snapped me out of it. Slowly, while I was there, things were starting to dwindle away that were present when I was at home, specifically being suicidal. It left, and I realized why. And I realized it was because I wasn't trapped anymore.
We're now going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsor.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is, therapy works. But what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships or at work, not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles and start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. Join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And special offer to Stronger Than You Think listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/stronger. That's betterhelp.com/stronger. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this episode.
We're now going to catch up with Elliot about where he is now in his healing process.
Now I live in a group home, and it's not like a traditional group home, it's a transitional living program, which is connected to a group home. And the transitional living program helps adults like me in foster care get ready for the adult life. And one of the biggest things that I still had to work on, and I'm still working on to this day, is going with the process and giving myself grace to be able to just heal. And it's so easy to, look around and see everybody else is successful and you should hurry up. And I'm still struggling with that a little bit, but trusting the process is necessary to heal. I think one of the biggest things that helped me grasp that was doing TFCBT, which is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. I would not be able to speak this well about my past if it was not for that therapy. And it's a therapy that focuses on finding warped worldviews, aspects of yourself that have been altered from your past to make you believe certain things, make you act certain ways, but you can analyze your past and what has made you think that way and just kind of be able to take it apart. It's like a puzzle. You take it apart and you find the right pieces again to put it back together. But this time you're able to do it way easier. And I know people that it didn't work for them. And that's okay. It's okay if certain aspects of therapy don't work. However, it doesn't hurt to try. And I really tried to apply myself. I went bi-weekly. It's usually finished within a year, but I finished it in 7 months.
Because CBT was so helpful in Elliot's healing journey, we're going to pause his story briefly so that Dr. Pate can elaborate more on cognitive behavioral therapy, help us better understand it, and give us some techniques that we can use in our own lives. So, Dr. Pate, is there a specific type of mental health disorder that CBT is especially effective at treating?
So CBT is a model that really works for many needs: anxiety, depression, trauma, ADHD, other kind of more neurodevelopmental folks who are on the autism spectrum, kids who have intellectual delays and disabilities. You'll find CBT is applicable in almost all areas of mental health. Some folks who have more serious mental illness like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, other more chronic and lifelong mental health needs. CBT is certainly effective, more often in conjunction with other treatment, like a psychiatric provider might provide through medication, other group modalities as well, to have kind of supportive elements. So it's more multidisciplinary, if you will.
Can you give us a general definition of CBT and what it's trying to do?
Sure. Yeah. So cognitive behavioral therapy is commonly referred to as CBT. And so it is an evidence-based practice, which means that there is a significant amount of science and research supporting its efficacy, both in the academic world, but also out in real life. The cognitive C of the acronym stands for essentially your thoughts. So what you're thinking in your brain, the messages that your internal monologue is providing to you, all of that dialogue, if you will, that flows through your brain. The B is behavioral. So B, behavior essentially referring to your actions and how you respond and what you do. The T, again, therapy, so it's a therapeutic modality, but the piece of the acronym that isn't actually there is the really third component that is important to consider is how you feel. So our emotion, our feelings are both compounded and also alleviated by how you think and how you act. So I can't just wave a magic wand and say, feel good, feel happier, don't be sad. But I can work with and teach young people and their families on how to think differently. So take one thought and turn it into another, or act differently. So if I'm feeling down and depressed, laying in bed and starting to notice that my mood is really low, well, let me get out of bed and see how that behavior, that action of moving around, getting in a new environment impacts how I'm emotionally feeling and the way that I think about myself in the world.
So say someone is depressed and they're in bed and they're thinking like, while they're listening to this, well, I'm stuck in bed because I'm depressed. And so how can I just will myself to do it when I don't feel like I have that will right now?
Absolutely. I would say even thinking about change is a part of the process. So just beginning to recognize your thought patterns, identify your emotions, that's a key part of where you start in CBT work, is the identifying aspects of my emotions, of labeling my feelings, of accurately interpreting my thoughts, because our brains are hardwired to go to the negative. So we often get stuck in those feedback loops of, I'm not good enough, why bother? No one's going to help me, what's the point? But if we can recognize that for, it's just a thought, it's not a fact, and look for alternatives. And if you're not there yet, find someone who's available to you, whether that's a personal friend or professional support, and work with them to find alternatives, because there are other thoughts that are more helpful and potentially more accurate that will help you to start to make small change.
Could you give an example of a negative thought that someone might be able to reshape through cognitive behavioral therapy?
Sure. So the kind of classic example that I usually work through with kids when they come into clinic with me or we are training for other staff out in the field is, think back to when we were walking down the hallways of elementary school, because we've all walked through the hallways at school, and somebody looks over at you and makes a funny face. For a lot of kids, the immediate thought is, what did I do? What's wrong with me? And that thought, though potentially accurate, not so helpful. And so looking at that thought and recognizing, like, when I think, what did I do? What's wrong with me? I probably feel pretty bad about myself. I might feel embarrassed. I might feel worried. I might be a little bit angry because that was supposed to be my friend. And now they're looking at me like I'm a jerk. Could I instead think, something's going on with my friend? Maybe they ate something gross at lunch because I didn't really think my pizza tasted that good either. That's a much more helpful thought, and it's going to help me want to move forward and address and engage with that person and say, hey, what's up with you? You made a face. Instead of walking the other way down the hallway and thinking, they hate me now. Why bother making friends? Everybody's going to abandon me anyway. Two very different responses, and the emotional component really shifts based on what you're thinking.
Are there any examples of something you see as a psychologist that people are thinking in the cognitive side that then is affecting their behaviors?
Sure. I think probably the one that comes to mind initially is folks who come in seeking treatment for anxiety and fears and worries. A classic response, and it is adaptive, it's human nature, is if I'm fearful of something, if I'm concerned with it, then I retreat. So there's an anxious avoidance pattern that takes place where I'm either scared or worried about something, and so my physiological, so my body gets aroused, my fear, my emotions are are heightened, and I experience really strong bodily distress. And so I am trying to escape and get away from whatever it is that I'm fearful of, whether that's actually physically fleeing from it or emotionally shutting down and avoiding the stressor, if you will. And so what's unfortunate about that pattern is that if you think of perhaps like a roller coaster you're riding on and you're starting to go up, 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 and so your stress level is rising and rising and rising, and the anxious avoidance actually, you remove yourself so you never get over the hump of the roller coaster. You never coast through to the other side and get that relief of, okay, my body actually can't sustain that intensity long term. But if I'm always jumping off the roller coaster before I coast over, it actually gets reinforced and the fear becomes stronger and the avoidance is more powerful. And so you can get into a really tricky, stuck pattern, if you will.
We'll now hear some of the challenges that Elliot took on through his use of CBT.
So first, with cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of the warped mindsets I would have would be related to like, I'm never going to be good enough, or I can't be what my parents want me to be, or who I care about. I can't be what they want me to be, just because that's how I felt for the longest time. But we would go through like, why? What was causing that? And a lot of it for me was simply because standards were set constantly. Standards that not only arose in academics or work, but also just in myself. I couldn't be the daughter that they wanted me to be. For my parents, they could either have an alive son or a dead daughter. And I'll take the latter. But CBT would help find things that are really ingrained in you. And your therapist would be able to start to fish out even the smallest of aggressions can have really big backstories. And all of that can help really flesh out, what is happening in your head when it's so hard to just decipher it by ourselves. Having someone to help take it apart with you and listen to your story and find these pieces and work them together is, I think, what makes it so successful.
What is your life like now, having gone through CBT?
It changed a lot for me, including realizing the fact that, this is going to be a long road. Not only due to my past, but also as a trans person. Ever since I went into foster care, I finally had the courage to come out. And that was probably just as scary as some things that have happened in the past year and a half. There is a lot of discrimination towards it, and there's not a lot of support for trans people in the foster care system by itself. However, being in youth villages, I would not be able to be where I am today. And I started testosterone a month ago, and just have all these resources, have my legal name changed, steps that finally make me feel more comfortable in dysphoria without my worker with youth villages.
How do you handle the challenge of having people openly discriminate against you?
This is what I tell people, is that especially if you're religious and you're it's not godly, I say, well, God made me the way I am. And one of those things that I've inherited is the condition of gender dysphoria. I don't get to choose to be trans. I don't get to choose to one day just decide I'm going to be a girl again. It's not easy. I'm not a political view. It doesn't define me. I'm just another person, and I want to be treated that way. So finally getting testosterone, I waited a good while before I was able to start, just because, some of my workers were a little apprehensive. It's a big change. It is a big change. I'm going through second puberty right now. But I remember the day I finally got my first testosterone shot, and it was so liberating. It was I made it. And ever since then, I've been significantly less depressed and just overall starting to feel like just way more like myself. And that's really what most of us trans people want, is just to feel okay and not be dehumanized.
What does the future look like for you right now?
So mainly, like, whenever I was in the hospital, I found out about these different positions, like peer support specialist, child crisis, and I realized that was what I was supposed to do. And with my experiences, I am working towards the future of being able to help people like me, because as trans youth, even as trans foster youth, we are so undermined and stigmatized and don't have someone to listen who understands. And I want to be able to offer that kind of safety net for so many people who need it. The future youth that come into this world need to be heard and listened to by people that understand. And I not only want to do this, but I know I need to, because I want trans kids to be able to be heard, because children are already not heard. The foster care system, it's difficult, but it's just twice as hard for trans youth. So I want to be there, and I want to be able to make some sort of dent, some sort of help at least someone, be able to get another breath, get their voice heard, and start anew.
What kind of message would you say to someone who is going through what you went through?
If you're trans and in foster care, especially if you're trans or in foster care, or just trans, and you're out there, no matter how bad it gets, no matter how alone you can feel, how isolated, you just got to keep pushing, because at the other side, you're going to find the people you need. One way or another, you are going to find those people, and you are already loved. While there is lots of discrimination towards our communities, there's just as much compassion. And compassion will always be more powerful than destruction. And if nobody has said it today, if you haven't heard a trans person say it, I'll say it, because I love you and you can do it.
Thank you for sharing your story, Elliot.
Definitely. Yeah, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It really means so much. I really hope that it'll make a difference, so.
It will.
I'm excited.
From Youth Villages, I'd like to say thank you for listening to this episode of Stronger Than You Think, and thank you to Elliot for sharing your story with us. If you'd like to get involved with Youth Villages, Dr. Pate has some resources where you can find out more information about our programs and how you can help.
We are always looking for support, and really the best place to take a look at would be our website. So that is www.youthvillages.org. You're going to see information around our volunteer system, our mentoring program, as well as career opportunities. And I will just put a plug in for our mentoring program. We know that kids who have an identified adult in their life who is connected to them and invested in them do well and have stronger and significantly improved outcomes. And so if you are at all interested in making a difference in a child's life on an individual basis, mentoring relationship is incredibly impactful. Most folks who are involved in the mentoring program actually feel like they get a lot more out of it than the young people, but I assure you it is a reciprocal relationship and incredibly meaningful experience.
Links to those resources can also be found in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to support the show, the best thing you can do is recommend it to a friend. Maybe share it with someone who you think might need to hear this right now. We'd also love to hear what you thought of today's episode, so leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Production support was provided by Parasar Studios in Memphis, Tennessee. On behalf of Youth Villages, this is Alec Ogg, reminding you that you're stronger than you think. If you or someone you know is feeling suicidal, Dr. Pate has a resource that you can use right now.
If you're in active crisis situations, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is a 24/7 phone as well as now text service, so that if you are in crisis, you can be connected immediately to a trained individual to help respond to your urgent needs, and if in the event that you are in imminent risk, connect you with emergency services to help you stay safe.
That number is 800-273-8255. 255. 255. 255.